Hello, Mark, from China. I'm high above Beijing as it wakes up. Early in the morning, look who we have with us, Helen-Ann Smith,
so
Asia
good to be
correspondent.
Here,
welcome.
as always.
This is very exciting. Welcome, Helen-Ann, and I hope your jet lag's not too bad. James, I've just been sent your location, and it says here on my map that you are 6,936 miles away from where I am in Washington, D.C. And I tell you what, guys, I spotted you both on bicycles earlier on a little film that you made, which made me a bit envious. I felt like I was the one who'd missed out on the holiday.
Yeah, it was a bit like that, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, that's our job, isn't it? Part work, part holiday.
Part having fun, right.
But you know what, Mark? I see that, the New York Post says Brett Ratner is coming out with Trump. He's the film director, did Melania, and he's recceing locations for Russia 4. I mean, we could have done it for half that budget.
Yeah, exactly. We had some gaffer tape, 2 rickety bikes, 2 bumbling idiots cycling through Tiananmen Square.
Yeah.
It was quite comic though, wasn't it? Because every time we were cycling along and then we would go over like a tiny bump and then all of our kit and equipment would just fly off the bike. I mean, honestly, it looked like amateur hour, didn't it?
Yeah, okay, no. We've been low budget on this trip, Mark. You know, the sign behind us on this barrier says, "Do not rely on." Think I might nick it for the desk back home.
I think it's okay to say that there's a thing that I'm sure Helen-Ann will be well aware of called Chinglish, which is basically when the Chinese completely translate something. Sometimes when you buy something very cheap from Amazon, which these days is often not from China, but once upon a time it was. It will have the instructions and it will be written in very, very bad English. So maybe that's what that is about. But I tell you what, since I lived in China 10 years ago,
it's one of my favourite things to do, to spot misspelt slogans on the back of Chinese T-shirts. It's just exquisite and delicious and hilarious. I just love it.
I bet the Chinese love that.
Yeah, they don't realise, usually.
I'm James Matthews in Beijing.
And I'm Mark Stone, many, many miles away in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Helen-Ann Smith, Sky News' Asia correspondent, with you, James, in the Chinese capital.
Yeah, on the podcast today, we three will preview Donald Trump's visit to, well, his good pal, according to Trump, Xi Jinping.
Yeah, it truly is a very, very important meeting. What I can't work out is whether it will all be sort of fake platitudes and actually not a great deal will get done, or whether these two pivotal leaders will pull it out of the bag and actually announce something that is meaningful to us all. We will see. And James, I'm dying to know too what you make of the place, because I lived there 10 years ago. You've not been before, I don't think. It's a remarkable place. And I think actually in the 10 years since I left, it has changed a huge amount. So much to get into.
So, Mark, you waved off the president from the South Lawn as he headed our way. You and, 100 or so other reporters?
Yeah, it was, as ever, James, a bit of a zoo. You know, Donald Trump likes to call himself accessible, and he is. I mean, there's no question about the fact that he puts himself in front of the cameras a lot. And, you know, he walked down the long line of reporters and took lots of questions. But as we've said so many times on this podcast, that doesn't mean that you actually get any meaningful answers out of him. And this really was a case in point. Frankly, guys, he talked nonsense from one end of the line of reporters to the other end of the line of reporters. He talked nonsense on Iran. He said it was all sorted. It wasn't a problem. He contradicted himself on China. He said at one point, we're going to talk a lot about Iran. And then literally moments later, as he moved down the line, he said, actually, I don't think Iran's going to come up at all with Xi Jinping. So absolutely extraordinary. And it's very frustrating, really, because, you know, you get a question with him and he just gives you an answer that's kind of frankly nonsensical. And that happened today. And so he's able to call himself accessible, but what he's not is putting himself up for combative interviews, sitting down with someone where you're actually able to interrogate him properly. So that's the frustration. I was down there as you say. We'll listen to what he said about Keir Starmer first, because, you know, given the British Prime Minister's current woes, which you may or may not have caught up with in great detail, I can tell you he's on the rocks for sure.
Yeah, we're across that.
Yeah.
I'm sure you are. I asked Trump about that because clearly he has a view on everything. So why not his advice for Keir Starmer?
That's up to him. But I've told him from day one, you're getting killed on energy. You're windmilling your country to death. Open up the North Sea. You have one of the greatest sources of energy in the world.
I mean, if you want to see windmilling yourself to death, I mean, you should look at how many they've got here. I mean, they're just absolutely everywhere when you step outside the city. But look, not what Starmer wants to hear, I imagine.
Yeah, it's interesting, the whole Starmer thing. The man who Trump has ritually humiliated through time. It strikes me, Mark and Helen-Ann, February 25, that was Starmer in the Oval Office. And remember, that was a time when he was being hailed as the Trump whisperer, the man who could handle Donald Trump, given the invitation for the state visit, letter from the king, and so on. At that point, the priority was avoiding another Zelensky moment, for all Western leaders, US allies. It was like going into the headmaster's office and, he was looking for bonhomie and friendship at all costs. That was the template now. But where are we now, just over a year later? And look at it, in the space of that time, the business model's changed on how Trump should be handled. Countries have reassessed their relationship with the United States. They've become less reliant and so are treading a tougher line now. That, of course, includes the UK. We saw that with the King, his speech to Congress, a speech written, of course, by Starmer's government.
I thought his response to my question on Starmer was interesting in that, it was kind of a grown-up response in the sense that he didn't take that opportunity to knock Starmer while he's down, or indeed to support him. He said, look, that's up to him what he does. But what he did do was then hit the familiar buttons on energy and on immigration. For me, though, the most interesting part of his weave down the line of reporters was his stuff on China. He said all the stuff about Xi Jinping being a great friend and all that sort of stuff, but specifically on Iran, because as I mentioned, at one point he said, we're going to talk a lot about Iran. And then moments later said, we're actually not going to talk about Iran. I don't think it'll come up very much. And I think that's probably more likely. I don't know what you both think, but I think he's not going, given that the Iran conflict is still going on, it's still a massive headache for him. He's not going to want to go to Xi Jinping, cap in hand, even privately, say to him, come on, Mr. Premier, Mr. President, can you help me out on Iran? He's just not going to want to do that, is he?
That's absolutely right. And it's just worth saying that that's how the Chinese see it, I think, and that's how they will very much like to frame this visit. The idea that the President of the United States coming to them for help with global issues. My God, it's just the most delicious sort of metaphor for them. It's not even a metaphor, is it? It's reality. They are the global player with the power to end this mess that the United States has made, and they're excited. Truly, I think they are.
Yeah, and I do wonder, however much, Mark, Trump on the White House lawn didn't want to look like the president scurrying to Xi, cap in hand. You only have to look back to Scott Bessent a few days ago, publicly calling on the Chinese to intervene, engage with its old friends in Iran. I think there's no doubt that Trump is looking to Xi to pull him out the quicksand. And as you say, Helen-Ann, the Chinese are loving that. They see the United States in decline, and this is a manifestation of it for them. A US president weakened by a mess of his making. And, before he left Washington, a couple of days ago, Mark, he said, speaking about his great relationship with Xi, he was asked specifically about the impact of Iran on the agenda here. He made the point that China gets 40% of his oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Xi, he said, would like to see a deal get done. He's got some brass suggesting that he knows the mind of an adversary. I think experience tells us that that's not necessarily the case with Donald Trump.
Trump is also, completely deluded. If he thinks he's going to come here and the Chinese are going to hand it to him on a platter, they're not. There's positives and negatives for China in all this. Of course their interests have been hurt by the war. They need oil from Iran. They need the Iranian regime to survive. It's an important counterbalance for them in the region. It's not been great for them. But look, on the flip side, to see their sort of greatest adversary depleted, distracted, it's running down kind of American public appetite for foreign intervention. All of this plays so brilliantly for China. It really, really does. And they don't want Donald Trump to come out of this whole situation looking somehow victorious. And they'll do their bit to make themselves look like the players, but they're not going to let him win, for want of a better word. They're just not.
It was, I think, Napoleon that said, quite a long time ago, obviously, he said, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. And I think that is precisely the game that China, the long game that China is playing right now. They're looking at what's happening in Iran. Yes, they are hurt economically by it, as everyone is. But they are also looking on and just watching America making an almighty blunder in the Middle East. And for them, they can enjoy that. And the other thing I think is the case is that while America is making this military blunder, the Chinese are watching. They're watching everything. They're watching America's military tactics in Iran. They're also, by the way, watching America using up so much of its stockpile of weapons, that's stuff they haven't already used up in Ukraine. All of this is really important for the Chinese. But I would also say that I think there is an opportunity for China, this nation that for so long has been so wary, so consciously wary of interfering in the domestic matters of other countries. Why? Because they don't want anyone to interfere in their own domestic or their own backyard. But now I think, in a sense, China has come of age to an extent that it feels it can be more assertive around the world. And on Iran, they could offer something if they wanted to Donald Trump. For example, they could say, look, maybe we can play around with the nuclear issue. You want Iran not to have a nuclear weapon. We're kind of up for that as well. Maybe we, China, can offer Iran some security guarantees. So Iran doesn't feel it needs nuclear weapons because we, the Chinese, will offer them security guarantees. So there are avenues, diplomatic avenues, where there could be kind of mutual benefit to both sides. But I don't think that Trump is going to want to be seen in any way to be asking the Chinese for a favor. And I don't think the Chinese are going to want to be seen necessarily to be helping out the Americans unless it is to their advantage.
And that's the thing, actually, unless it is to their advantage, right? Because I also think this crisis has shown a lot about kind of the way that China deals with its quote unquote allies and friends, right? It is a cold, calculated, pragmatic system. You know, they don't want the Iranians to fall because it doesn't suit them, but they're not going to sort of overextend themselves out of some sort of affinity that frankly they don't feel. So they will take, as they always do, and I think this is a key point coming into this summit as well, they plan in years and decades. They don't plan in days and weeks. They're not looking to the next news cycle. They're like, how does this conflict play out over the next couple of years? How do we slowly, carefully position ourselves whereby our energy is secured, our allegiances are secured, and our future path towards the things that we want is laid out ahead of us? And of course, as we all know, number one on that list of things they ultimately want is Taiwan. And we can talk later about how this all helps them so much in that particular quest.
Yeah, I think the way you put it yesterday, Helen, and we were talking, and you said, you know, the United States, hang on a minute, you're 250 years old. The Chinese look at that and say, listen, we've been, you know, this is not our first rodeo. We've been around for just a bit longer.
5,000 years of history. Yeah. Yeah.
5,000 years, you're right. And they take those years very, very slowly. They're not in a hurry, the Chinese, one bit. They don't need to rely, Xi Jinping doesn't need to rely on elections. He doesn't need to rely on any electoral cycle. And like I said this yesterday, but I think it's worth repeating that for me, the Chinese foreign policy and American foreign policy, they could not be more different, especially Xi Jinping and Trump's foreign policy. The Chinese, it's all about patience, it's about observation, self-control, all combined together in this sort of long game of strategic gain. But America's foreign policy literally is the opposite of that. Absolutely no self-control, absolutely no observation of what the other side is doing, what the enemy is doing, and no patience at all. So not really a very neat match, these two.
Helen-Ann, we've spoken about Iran. Something else near the top of the agenda here is Taiwan, subject that you've studied at length.
At length, yeah. I've been, multiple times in my time here. And look, I think it's no exaggeration to say that anxiety there is truly, truly rising. And
you were there last week.
Yeah, we were there last week. And I've been, as I said, many times in my reporting sort of stint here in China. And, you can really tangibly really chart the increase, I think, particularly amongst official circles. Normal people have this way of sort of getting on with their lives and sort of saying, oh, we're not that bothered about it. But I think under the surface, people are really, really anxious. And look, I cannot emphasize enough just how central this is to the Chinese. I cannot overstate it. It is fundamental to them. It is at, Xi Jinping says, the core of the core interests. But, look, it's a legacy issue for him. And it's not just economic. Of course, it's economic. They like it. Taiwan has this wonderful, wonderful chips business that's incredibly valuable. It's strategic and defensive. Taiwan's geography is just absolutely crucial in terms of the Pacific and the access there. But it's sort of moral to them as well. Like, if they were able to retake Taiwan, they see that as the absolute ultimate proof point of their ascendancy as a superpower. It's the final outstanding jigsaw puzzle left over from the century of colonial humiliation, they like to call it. So, look, it's vital for them. And they will be doing everything they can to push for it. They don't actually want to fight a war over it, right? They've seen what's happened in Ukraine. It's expensive. It's risky. They would just love a diplomatic solution. And that is what they are gradually chipping away at in all sorts of different ways. Policy of patience. And crucially, they see Trump as the best opportunity perhaps they have ever had to make progress on that.
Yeah, the Trump factor with Taiwan is truly fascinating because I really don't think it is clear that Trump would come to Taiwan's defense in the event that China made a move. It's a question I've actually been dying to ask President Trump whenever we get any time with him. I haven't got round to it because there are other questions that seem at that moment to be more important. But it's a crucial question. If China made a move, what would Trump do? And I think clearly the Chinese are wondering the same thing. And I'm intrigued to see what noises, what language President Trump uses when he is asked about Taiwan, as I'm assuming he will be at any moments with the media over the next few days. The other point to make about Taiwan is, clearly it's got 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors that are made there. So if there was a conflict in East Asia, quite apart from the fact that if it became a conflict between the United States and China, then it would become a world war and all bets would be off. But if there was a conflict of any sort that disrupted the supply chains in East Asia, not least the world's most advanced semiconductors, I think it would make what we're seeing right now in the Strait of Hormuz, frankly, look like a picnic. Because the challenges of disrupted supply chains in East Asia would just be so much more huge and would impact all of us so much. So the stakes are huge.
Yeah, Trump's headline position is, same as it ever was in the United States, strategic ambiguity. But you look at his predecessors, and they were more explicit in terms of we would defend Taiwan if China attacked. With Trump, it's not so much. He is ambiguous, actually, equivocal.
Less of the strategic, just ambiguous.
Yeah, I think he will be fine, he said when he was asked about, Taiwan and when it came up in discussions. He was asked this, whether or not the US should still be selling weapons to Taiwan. His answer was, well, I'm going to have that conversation with President Xi, which begs question number two. Why should Xi have an input?
Even that is an unbelievable break of precedent. The fact that he would discuss arms sales with President Xi, that is, the Taiwanese are horrified by that, like truly horrified. And I think that gets to the fundamental point here, the nuances, the very subtle nuances of this very complex geopolitical situation. I don't think it's too far to say are slightly lost on Trump. And that's what worries people, because tiny changes to the semantics, to the wording, will have absolutely enormous long-term implications when it comes to Taiwan. So Trump may see it as kind of an easy giveaway. He's like, I'll just change the words do not support to oppose. That'll be fine. That's not fine in terms of how the Taiwanese would see it, because these are these tiny changes. And what the strategy is of the CCP, what China's strategy is to just chip away, to undermine Taiwanese confidence, to undermine the pro-independence movement there, so that when a big moment happens, the Taiwanese people go, oh gosh, like the Americans aren't behind us, it's just not worth it. That is exactly the CCP strategy. And a character like Trump plays just so straight into their hands.
Beyond Trump, the American officials who brief the likes of us, they're insisting there is no change in US policy. I think whether Trump holds to that would be, a serious question. This is a president who does politics on instinct and self-interest, and generally has been erratic on China. And in Taiwan, they'll be worried that he will freestyle towards any concession, appeasement that gives China the incremental shift in the whole power dynamic for a kickoff, but also on policy with regard to Taiwan.
And there's another thing as well, which I think is fascinating, and it relates to trade and tariffs and chips, because quietly, without anyone really noticing, over the last year or so, one thing that President Trump has been doing is to encourage other countries, if they want to remove tariffs, to make their goods in America. Now, we've heard, that he says Germans should make their cars in America, then they don't have to pay tariffs. He's been doing it to Taiwan as well. He's been telling the Taiwanese, if you make your chips in America, then I'm going to be less stringent with my tariffs. And over time, and when we talk about America not playing a long game, I think in this case, maybe they are playing a long game, because I think what he's trying to do is encourage Taiwan to open up chip factories in America, which will mean that there is less reason for Trump to defend Taiwan, because fewer chips will be made there in the future. So I think that's something to watch, certainly.
The other thing about the Taiwan question is that when it comes to this summit this week, I think it's pretty unlikely there's going to be suddenly some joint statement about the future of Taiwan. I think that's unlikely. But again, it comes back to the Chinese long game. This is not the only time Xi and Trump will meet this year, right? They will meet multiple times. It will come up every time. They will just chip away slowly, quietly. It won't be in probably the official, one-to-ones. It will be in the dinners and the corridor chats, and just that careful moving of mindset, carefully moving towards a shift in emphasis. That's the Chinese playbook. And again, as I said earlier, it gets straight at Trump's weaknesses, I think.
Any micro shift towards what the Chinese want, that resets the US position, and
the
would
power
be
dynamic.
and it would be a new baseline for future discussions.
Correct.
Helen-Ann, I wonder, do you think that the Chinese are going to eat Team Trump for breakfast?
Honestly, Mark, I think it's likely. I really do. I think it's likely, because I think their strategy coming into this meeting is, look, bide your time, lean into your advantages, don't blink, just let him make his mistakes. And crucially, I think they've learned a lot in the sort of the intermediary years between his first term and his second term. I think his first term, I think China didn't really know what to do with Donald Trump, The first trade war, they actually rolled over quite quickly. They actually sort of let him have sort of what he wanted quite quickly. And I think it was because there's such an unusual force, they didn't really know how to deal with him. But I think they've learned a lot in the preceding years. And certainly in the trade war that we saw last year, the sort of tariff escalation, they have learned that matching strength with strength works with Donald Trump. And it has played enormously well for them, not just domestically, but in this continent and globally. And they're going to stick to their guns. I think they're going to be far better prepared, because they always are. And I think they're going to be strategic and hard-lined. And I think they could eat him for breakfast. I really do.
Yeah, and the other thing that has changed so fast is China's military. I mean, it is a stronger country diplomatically, we know that, but it's a much stronger country in a military sense as well. I remember when I was there 10 years ago, there was massive fanfare about China launching its first aircraft carrier, the Liaoning, which it had actually bought secondhand off the Russians. The Soviet Union collapsed. This aircraft carrier ended up in the Black Sea somewhere. Ukraine had it. And then the Ukrainians sold this half-built hulk of an aircraft carrier to the Chinese. They then rebuilt it into a proper ship, which they launched in 2012, I think it was. Massive fanfare about a second-hand aircraft carrier. the China of today would not be buying someone else's knockoffs. The China of today builds its own, and it builds them well, it builds them proudly. Now they've got 3 aircraft carriers, still not nearly as many as I think the 11 that the Americans have got, but they've got 3, and they have got so many fast jets. They've got hypersonic missiles. This is a massively capable Chinese military. I was looking at some figures earlier. They have one shipyard in China that makes more ships than all of America's shipyards combined. So they are catching up with America very fast. And in some areas, some military areas, they are well ahead of the Americans already.
One thing I would say to that, though, that just links this straight back into Iran and Taiwan and all of these things, is that you're right, Mark. Their military is increasingly impressive. They have poured billions into modernising and expanding. It is absolutely now the biggest in the world. There are question marks over whether it's the most capable, probably not. But what it absolutely isn't is experienced, right? The modern PLA, the modern Chinese armies never fought a war, and crucially, this moment, this Iran war moment, and there's a lot of chat here about this being sort of America's Wizard of Oz moment, right? That suddenly the curtain gets drawn up and this myth of American military prowess and a military might that will beat any obstacle, that kind of myth has been lifted. And the Chinese are watching this so closely. And they're thinking, maybe our sort of slight lack of experience isn't as important as we might have thought. Perhaps there really are openings for us, particularly vis-a-vis Taiwan. I think that really matters.
Well, it does matter, but the other thing is that you're right. The PLA has not fought a war ever, pretty much. But America hasn't fought a war against a peer of which China would now be classed since 1945. I mean, America has fought quite a lot of wars, but they've always been against a much weaker enemy. So I think that's worth considering. The other sort of depressing, scary thought is that a war between America and China wouldn't involve ground troops running around here, there, and everywhere. A war between America and China would get very large very quickly. Anyway, guys, enough about war. Let's talk about the pomp, because if there's one thing that the Chinese are absolutely brilliant at, it's pomp and ceremony. I imagine, I've been to a few big parades in Tiananmen Square. I imagine they're pulling out all the bells and whistles for President Trump, aren't they? Tell me, Helen-Ann, what are we going to see? How's it all going to play out?
Well, actually, Mark, the degree of bells and whistles, I think, will be interesting because you can read so much into kind of the hierarchy, if you like, on Chinese visits like this, because actually they have a parade of leaders constantly through. And you can read small things like how many dancers are there on the tarmac? And do they walk down and inspect the soldiers? Do they not? Do they do that inside or outside? All of these little tiny differences are quite telling about sort of where a leader's standing is. So you would expect that they would give the President of the United States the biggest, most grand, most sort of over-the-top welcome. But if they don't, that's telling in itself. So we should look out for that. And look, I can't emphasize enough in China how the staging, the intricacies of every flower arrangement, every flag, every walk along, who's in front, who's behind, how many people do they have in their entourage, all this stuff is just so vital, and we'll have lots of chances to look through that. We've obviously got the important meetings in the Great Hall of the People. That'll be the proper sort of bilateral. We then know they're going to go do a walk around at the Temple of Heaven, which is a sort of very beautiful historic site in the south of Beijing, and then they're going to have a state banquet. So there's lots of opportunities to kind of look at this stuff. But look, remember, in Chinese culture, respect and sort of reverence, hierarchy, there's a much finer sort of margin for error in the way the Chinese see that. It's massively important. And Xi Jinping has spent the last 15 years of his presidency working up to the fact that he should be seen as an equal to the President of the United States. So be in no doubt, this is massively important to the Chinese.
I think Donald Trump's going to like China, actually, Helen, and a little bit of communism will go a long way in his book, I think. Clean streets, police checking your passport every 100 yards, a media that does and says what you tell it to. But I think, interestingly, we were talking about coverage, the journalism of an event like this. Now, as we know, Mark, the Americans will be briefing us to the eyeballs about what was said, who won, this arm wrestle, who was victorious, all the rest of it. But the Chinese, by contrast, will say pretty much nothing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not quite pretty much nothing, but certainly in comparison to what the Americans will say. I mean, we'll get some official readouts. They'll be pretty bland. They'll list the things they spoke about. And our art is having to read between the lines on those sort of very kind of subtle hints, if you like. But again, this is their strategy, right? They like to contrast themselves against the kind of American chaos as they see it. So that kind of reserved, in control, everything's in its place. That's how they play, and that's how they want the world to see them as well.
And how does the Chinese media then report that?
Interesting, yeah. So the Chinese media will certainly report it as a grand success for China, whatever's said and whatever's done, of course. The media here is that, well, there's no such thing as a free media here. It's all state-controlled, pretty much. So, yeah, they report it, usually quite factually. They don't sort of have that much space to sort of elaborate. You don't really have sort of columnists and opinion writers in quite the same way that you do elsewhere. So, it would all be pretty praising, I would think.
Yeah, it can be quite an oppressive place, Beijing. First impressions are that you're being watched. Certainly in Tiananmen Square, where we were cycling yesterday, cameras everywhere, as I say, guards, security, in this place where there were student protests, and hundreds, nobody quite knows the exact number, were massacred by the authorities.
You brought that up on the bike with Helen-Ann. I thought it was brave of you.
Well, I kind of felt we had to, because Tiananmen Square, as you know, it's this showpiece square, centre of town, celebrated for the sights and sounds. But I think everybody needs a reality check on this place and what's happened in this place.
Just for our listeners who might not know, it's, as the years have gone on, to even talk about what happened in Tiananmen Square on Tiananmen Square is kind of impossible. And actually, as a journalist, I'm not allowed to just walk onto Tiananmen Square. So James and I had to cycle along the road that essentially runs sort of, along the side of it. My visa here, well, I can't just go there as a tourist. I can't do it. So it is such a sensitive place for all of those reasons that you guys understand.
I know a man who got into trouble talking about Tiananmen Square 1989, Helen-Ann. His name is Mark Stone. Tell us, Mark.
I was just going to say it's fascinating that nothing's changed because I remember having to do we were doing a report about Tiananmen Square one year, and the only way we could film in Tiananmen Square, we did it live, was to be in our car driving round. You guys chose bicycles, much more sensible. But then the following year, we did have passes to be there for, I can't remember what event it was. And I thought I'd do a piece to camera and talk about June the 4th, the student uprising. And that didn't go down very well at all. And we found ourselves in the back of a police van and off we were.
I was watching this, Mark, at the time, live on TV.
It was quite a moment. But James, you're a brave man to bring it up on a bicycle.
I was going to say, the thing is the pushback might come my way. That's the problem.
But Mark, listen, your story doesn't end there because we were watching on TV. So was your dad.
Yes, James, he was. He was watching at home, and he rang up Sky. He didn't know he was worried. Obviously, he's like, my son's just been arrested in Tiananmen Square, so he didn't know who my boss was or anything, but he did have the Sky switchboard number. So he rang the Sky switchboard. And said, hello, my name is Anthony Stone, and I'm Mark Stone's father. He's just been arrested in Tiananmen Square, and I would like to speak to the head of Sky News. And amazingly, and maybe against all protocol, the switchboard just said, yes, of course, we'll put you through. And then our editor at the time, the wonderful John Riley, was actually on a day off, and his mobile phone rang. And the voice said, John Riley, it's Anthony Stone here, Mark Stone's father. He's just been arrested, and I'm wondering what you're going to do about it. What's your protocol? To which John replied, "We've got it all under control, Mr. Stone. We'll deal with it." And then proceeded to ring up the news desk and say, "What's all this about Mark being arrested?"
Yeah.
He had no idea what had happened. Anyway, it all ended happily ever after. I wasn't kicked out of China. In fact, the reason I left China was because the pollution back then was absolutely terrible. We just had a baby, and it seemed after 3 years we could extend or move, and we decided to move. But they appear at least to have sorted all that out now.
Well, to a degree, yeah. Compared to when you were here, Mark, it's so much better. I mean, we do have some polluted days, absolutely, but we also have plenty of clear sky days. But in a way, the degree to which China is cleared up the pollution here is perhaps one of the best adverts you could ask for why authoritarianism works, because they just decided they were going to do it. So out went the factories, out went the polluting motorbikes. Didn't matter who was affected, just get it done. And within 10 years, in fairness, the difference is huge.
Yeah, I tell you what strikes me on first sight is the sound, how tranquil, how quiet the roads are. You know, like major 3-lane highways through the centre of town, and all you hear is that contented hum of electric vehicles, where normally it would be the roar of car engines as we know it back home. I think when Donald Trump lands in town, you know, I think he's going to be the noisiest on the highway, not for the first time. You know, and I think China, largest manufacturer of electric vehicles, I think it's giving us a sense of the future.
And actually, tariffs on EVs is one of the things that could well come up as well.
Right, guys, it must be mid-morning for you now. We've been talking for far too long. I'll let you get on. I'm going to go and have a glass of wine. And good luck with the day or two ahead.
At 7:30 a.m.
Excellent. Good for you. Go and drink some... What's that drink, Helen-Ann? That absolutely... Baijiu, is it what it's called?
Baijiu. Yeah, Baijiu. It's a rice, it's like a rice wine. It's like a rice spirit, and it is like petrol.
Go and enjoy a bit of Baijiu and enjoy the days ahead. Trump100@sky.uk. That's the email address if you've got any questions, comments. James and Helen-Ann will be back later in the week to absorb it all and digest what happened.
Yeah. See you from Beijing. All the best.